The October wind carried the
You
scent
look
of
so
dying leaves
familiar.
across
Have we
Shelburne
met
Road,
before?
that
You remind me
particular
of someone I
Vermont
used to know.
fragrance of decay and transformation that marked the passage of another year. In the Shaw's supermarket parking lot, a black Audi A8 sat motionless beneath the crimson canopy of maple trees, its engine silent, its driver standing beside it with a phone pressed to her ear and frustration etched into every line of her face. Victoria Harrington had built an empire on precision. She scheduled her days in 15-minute increments. She anticipated problems before they materialized. She controlled variables with the ruthlessness of a general commanding troops in battle. But a car breaking down in a supermarket parking lot at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, this she had not anticipated. The dealership promised 2 hours. 2 hours of standing in a parking lot like some stranded teenager while the sun began its descent toward the Green Mountains. She ended the call without saying goodbye and stared at her phone as if willing it to solve this problem through sheer force of her displeasure. A Ford F-150 pulled into the space 3 spots down. The truck was old, probably 15 years at least, but maintained with evident care the kind of vehicle that told stories about its owner before he ever opened his mouth. The door swung open and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that spoke of decades of physical labor rather than gym memberships. His hair had gone salt and pepper cropped, short and practical. He wore a red and black flannel shirt beneath coveralls that bore a logo she couldn't quite read from this distance. When he walked, there was an economy to his movements, nothing wasted, nothing performed for an audience. He noticed her standing beside the dead Audi, noticed the way she held herself, that particular combination of expensive clothing and obvious distress. He changed direction, moving toward her, with the unhurried gait of a man who had learned that most problems could wait. His voice was low, direct, stripped of unnecessary words. Car trouble. Victoria did not look up from her phone. I'm handling it. 2 hour wait from the dealer. I can take a look now. She finally raised her eyes, prepared to dismiss this stranger with the practiced coldness that had served her well in boardrooms across 3 continents. But something stopped her. Something in the way he stood, the particular angle of his shoulders, the way the late afternoon light caught his profile. He was already moving toward the hood, not waiting for permission. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, and that was when she saw it, the scar. 8 inches of raised tissue running along the back of his left hand, pale against weathered skin, the kind of mark that came from serious trauma rather than casual accident. Her heart stopped. Actually stopped for one fraction of a second that stretched into eternity. She knew that scar. She had traced it with her fingers 20 years ago, when it was still angry and red and healing. She had kissed it on summer nights when the fireflies danced over Lake Champlain and the future seemed infinite with possibility. The word escaped her lips before she could stop it, barely more than a breath, almost lost in the October wind. Bear. His hands froze on the hood latch. The muscles in his back went rigid beneath the flannel shirt. He did not turn around. Bear. Louder now, her voice finding strength even as her legs threatened to fail him. It's you. After all this time, it's you. When he finally turned, to his face was a wall. 20 years of brick and mortar carefully constructed to keep the world at bay. Whatever had flickered in his eyes, recognition, shock, perhaps something deeper, was gone before she could name it. Wrong person. The words fell like stones dropped into still water. No, Victoria shook her head, stepping toward him, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. I'm not wrong. 20 years, but I would know you anywhere. The way you walk, the way you hold yourself, that scar on your hand from the accident, that Victoria Harrington. Her name in his mouth was acid, something to be expelled rather than spoken. The Princess of Burlington finally came home. He remembered, of course he remembered, and the way he spoke her name told her everything she needed to know about what those 20 years had been for him. Marcus, please, I need to explain. Alternators shot. He cut her off as cleanly as a surgeon with a scalpel. I can jump it, get you enough charge to reach the Audi dealer in South Burlington. 20 minutes if traffic cooperates. I don't care about the car. That's obvious. $80,000 machine, and you probably haven't changed the oil yourself once. I'm trying to talk to you, and I'm trying to help you with your car. He turned back to the engine, dismissing her with his shoulders as effectively as any slammed a door. That's what I do. I fix things. Cars, trucks, motorcycles. Things that are broken. Things that can actually be repaired. The implication hung between them like smoke. Victoria pressed forward, circling the open hood to stand where he could not avoid her gaze. The night before everything happened, I wrote you a letter. I gave it to Martha, our housekeeper, and told her to bring it to your house on Pine Street. I explained everything, why my father was sending me away, how I would come back for you, how we could. His laugh was a blade sharp and hollow. What letter? The letter I wrote, 3 pages. I told you to wait for me, that I would find a way back, that what we had was... I never received any letter. Each word was precise, hammered out like nails into a coffin. No letter, no phone call, no telegram, no message delivered by carrier pigeon or smoke signal or any other method of communication invented by human beings. What I received was silence, complete and total silence, while I lay in a hospital bed, wondering if I would ever use this hand again. Victoria's face went white. That's not possible. I gave it to Martha myself. I watched her put it in her purse. She promised she would, while my mother was in surgery. He kept going as if she had not spoken, and something terrible was building in his voice, 20 years of pressure finally finding a crack to escape through. While doctors were telling me she might never walk again. While police officers were standing at my bedside asking why I had been driving recklessly, why I had run a red light, why I had caused an accident that put an innocent woman in a wheelchair. Marcus, while the scholarship committee was revoking my admission, while my name was being dragged through every conversation in this town, while I was trying to figure out how to pay for my mother's medical bills with a hand that couldn't grip a wrench without screaming in pain, he finally stopped breathing hard, and the look he gave her was something she would carry for the rest of her life. While all of that was happening, Victoria Harrington was on a plane to London, living in her father's penthouse, starting her MBA at some fancy European university, and she never sent a single goddamn letter. I did send it. Her voice cracked. Marcus, I swear to you on everything I have ever loved, I wrote that letter. I poured my heart onto those pages. I told you that I loved you, that my father was forcing me to leave, that I would come back the moment I could stop. And I gave it to Martha, and I watched her walk out the door with it in her hands, and I truly believed that you would receive it, and you would know that I didn't abandon you, that I never wanted to leave. I said stop. The word echoed across the parking lot, startling a flock of starlings from a nearby tree. They rose in a black cloud against the red-orange sky, swirling like a living shadow before disappearing over the rooftops. Marcus closed the hood of her car with controlled force. When he spoke again, his voice was flat, emptied of the rage that had flared moments before, which was somehow worse. 20 years, Victoria. You can buy a lot of things with Daddy's money, but you can't buy back time that's already been lost. He walked to his truck, retrieved a set of jumper cables and a battery pack. His movements were mechanical now, a man doing a boy rather than engaging in a conversation. Victoria stood frozen, watching him work, her mind racing through implications she was only beginning to understand. The letter had never arrived. 20 years of silence, and he had believed she simply walked away. 20 years of him building a new life in the shadow of her abandonment, never knowing that she had tried, never knowing that she had screamed and fought and eventually been broken by a father whose cruelty she was only now beginning to comprehend. Marcus connected the battery pack and the Audi hummed back to life. He disconnected the cables with practiced efficiency, coiling them as he walked back to his truck. $50 for the jump. His voice was professional, now distant as a customer service representative reading from a script. Or don't pay. I don't care either way. Marcus, please. But he was already climbing into his truck, the door slamming shut between them like a verdict. The F-150's engine rumbled to life, and Victoria watched him reverse out of the parking space, swing the truck toward the exit, and disappear into the flow of evening traffic. The sun had dropped below the tree line, now painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Victoria stood beside her, running car keys in hand, unable to move, unable to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. He was alive. He was here in Burlington, probably had been all along. And for 20 years he had believed she abandoned him without a word. Her father had done this. She knew it with a certainty that settled into her bones like ice water. The letter had never reached Marcus because Richard Harrington had made sure it wouldn't. Just like he had made sure she couldn't contact anyone from Burlington during those first crucial months in London. Just like he had made sure every trace of Marcus Dawson, she caught herself remembering the name on his coveralls, Marcus Cole. He was calling himself now. Different name. That explained why her periodic searches over the years had turned up nothing. Richard Harrington had been thorough. He had dismantled her life and Marcus's life with surgical precision, and she had been too young, too dependent, too thoroughly controlled to stop him. But she wasn't young anymore. She wasn't dependent, and she had built her own empire now, entirely separate from her father's reach. Victoria climbed into her car and pulled the door shut. The leather seat was cold against her back. The dashboard glowed with its familiar constellation of controls and indicators. Everything functioning normally now, as if the breakdown had never happened. On the passenger seat, something caught her eye, a rectangle of white against the dark leather. She reached for it, already knowing what it would be. A business card, slightly worn at the edges, the kind that had been handled many times before being lost. Cole's Auto Repair, Marcus Cole owner, an address on Pine Street, Burlington, Vermont. He must have had it in his pocket or his toolkit. It must have fallen when he was leaning into the engine bay. A small thing, insignificant, the kind of accidental detail that happened 1,000 times a day in parking lots across America. But Victoria held it like a lifeline, like a message from the universe she had stopped believing in years ago, Pine Street. She knew exactly where that was. She had driven past it dozens of times during her childhood, back when it was just another road in a small Vermont city, back before it became the place where Marcus Dawson Cole had built his new life without her. She drove to her hotel in silence, the business card tucked into her jacket pocket, her mind churning through decades of lies. The Burlington Hilton had not changed much since she left. The lobby still had that same mid-century modern aesthetic, the same views of the lake, the same polished surfaces that reflected her face back at her with uncomfortable clarity. She checked in under her own name. There was no point in hiding, not anymore, and took the elevator to a room on the 7th floor. The bed was made with hotel precision. The windows looked out over Lake Champlain, where the last light of day was fading into purple twilight. Victoria kicked off her heels and sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the business card in her hands. Cole's Auto Repair. He had taken his father's name. Thomas Cole, the mechanic who had died of a heart attack when Marcus was 16, leaving his son and widow drowning in debt. She remembered Marcus talking about him during those summer nights, remembered the grief that still lived in his voice years after the funeral. Thomas Cole had taught his son everything about engines and transmissions and the satisfaction of fixing things with your hands. And Marcus had honored that legacy by taking his name, by building a business, by creating something solid and real in the wreckage of his former life. While she had been in London, then New York, then wherever her career demanded climbing corporate ladders and accumulating wealth that never quite filled the emptiness inside her. Victoria pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Her lawyer answered on the second ring, her voice carrying that particular blend of competence and discretion that made her invaluable. "Catherine, I need a favor. Actually, I need several favors, and I need them to stay completely confidential. Can you recommend a private investigator? Someone good, someone who can trace events from 20 years ago. This is about Burlington." It was not a question. Catherine Webb had been her lawyer for 12 years, had seen her through business deals and personal crises and everything in between. She knew Victoria well enough to read between the lines. "It's about my father." Victoria's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "I think he did something terrible a long time ago. Something I'm only now beginning to understand. And I need to know the truth no matter what it costs. I can have a name for you by morning. James Morrison, former FBI, specializes in cold cases and document authentication. He's expensive, but he's the best. Money isn't an issue." "I know it isn't." Catherine paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a warning. "If this investigation leads where I think it might lead, you need to be prepared for the consequences. Your father is not the kind of man who forgives being exposed." Victoria thought of Marcus's face in the parking lot. The wall he had built around himself, the rage simmering beneath the surface, the 20 years of believing he had been abandoned without explanation. "I've spent my entire adult life avoiding hard truths, Catherine, running from them, burying them, pretending they didn't exist. That ends now. Whatever this investigation uncovers, I'll face it." She ended the call and sat in the gathering darkness, watching the lights of Burlington begin to glitter along the lakeshore. Somewhere out there, Marcus was closing up his garage, maybe eating dinner with a daughter whose photograph she had not yet seen, living a life that had been built on the ruins of the one her father had destroyed. The photograph. She had not actually seen it, had only caught a glimpse of something when he bent over the engine, maybe a wallet in his back pocket. But he had spoken of no one else. No wife, no partner, no other woman in his life. The bitterness in his voice suggested someone who had been alone for a long time. She needed to know more. She needed to understand what had happened to him in those 20 years, needed to piece together the life he had built from the wreckage she had been forced to leave behind. But first she needed to return his wallet. The thought came to her suddenly, a strategy forming in her mind with the same clarity she brought to business negotiations. He had no reason to see her again, no reason to listen to anything she had to say. But if she had something of his, something he needed that would change the calculation. She needed a reason to go to Cole's Auto Repair, and she would find one. 3 days later, Victoria parked her rental car. She had sent the Audi to the dealer for proper repairs across the street from a modest building on Pine Street. The garage was not large, maybe 4 bays at most, but it was clean and well maintained. A hand-painted sign hung over the main entrance, Cole's Auto Repair. Beneath it, smaller letters, Classics and Performance Vehicles. Since 2006. 18 years he had been in business. He had started the year after the accident, probably working out of someone else's garage, at first saving every penny until he could afford his own space. Building something from nothing while she had been handed everything on a silver platter. Victoria sat in her car and watched the garage for several minutes, marshaling her courage. Through the open bay doors, she could see figures moving, Marcus's distinctive silhouette beneath the lift where a 1969 Mustang was elevated. Another man working at a parts bench along the wall. The smell of motor oil and coffee drifted across the street, mixing with the autumn air. She had his wallet in her purse. She had found it wedged between the passenger seat and the center console of her rental car, where it must have fallen from his pocket when he leaned into the Audi's engine bay. Inside was his driver's license, the photograph years old but recognizably him. $47 in cash, 2 credit cards, and a photograph. The photograph had stopped her cold. A little girl with honey blonde hair and blue-gray eyes that were unmistakably Marcus's. She was wearing overalls and a gap-toothed smile, standing in front of what looked like the same garage Victoria was now watching. On the back of the photograph, in careful handwriting, Lily, first day of 2nd grade. Marcus had a daughter, a child who looked to be 7 years old. A child whose mother was conspicuously absent from the wallet that traveled everywhere with him. Victoria had not slept well since finding that photograph. Her dreams had been filled with images of the life she might have had, the children she might have raised, the decades she might have spent with a man she had loved, with every fiber of her 27-year-old heart. But those dreams were gone now. The past could not be rewritten. She could only deal with the present, and the present required her to walk into that garage and face Marcus Cole again. She crossed the street with the wallet in her hand, her heels clicking against the asphalt with more confidence than she felt. The garage was warm inside, heated by the massive industrial heaters mounted near the ceiling, smelling of rubber and solvent, and something else, coffee, she realized, from an ancient machine tucked into the corner near a battered desk. Marcus was beneath the Mustang, his legs visible, extending from under the chassis. The other man, stocky build, early 50s, with grease-stained hands and kind eyes, looked up from his workbench and studied her with open curiosity. "Help you with something?" "I'm looking for Marcus Cole." Something shifted in the man's expression, a wariness entering his gaze. "He's occupied at the moment, something I can assist with. I have something that belongs to him." Victoria held up the wallet. "He left it in my car when he helped me in the Shaw's parking lot a few days ago." The legs beneath the Mustang stopped moving. A moment later, Marcus rolled out on a wheeled creeper, his face already set in that familiar wall of stone. He stood in one fluid motion, wiping his hands on a rag that was already more oil than cloth. "You could have mailed it." "I could have, but I thought you might need it sooner." He crossed the garage in 3 long strides, reaching for the wallet with a motion that expected her to simply hand it over and leave. But Victoria did not release her grip. "I opened it." Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I know I shouldn't have, but I needed to see, I needed to know who you had become." Marcus's jaw tightened. "And what did you find, Victoria? Proof that I survived your abandonment? Evidence that I managed to build a life without the precious Harrington princess to save me?" I found a photograph of a little girl with your eyes. Something cracked behind the wall he had borrowed. Just for a moment, just long enough for her to see the father beneath the fortress before the stone reassembled itself. That's none of your business. She's beautiful. She looks like you. I said it's none of your business. Victoria finally released the wallet, watching as he tucked it into his back pocket with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. The other man, Danny, she would learn later, had turned back to his workbench, giving them the privacy of turned shoulders, even if he could still hear every word. The letter I told you about. Victoria pressed forward, knowing she might not get another chance. I spoke with Catherine, my lawyer. She's having someone investigate what happened to it. I need to know why it never reached you, Marcus. I need to understand what my father did. Your father. The words were a curse. You want to understand what your father did. Then let me paint you a picture, Victoria. Let me tell you what happened while you were drinking champagne in London and earning your MBA at whatever prestigious European institution Daddy's money bought you. He stepped closer, and for the first time, Victoria saw the full depth of the rage he had been carrying. It was a living thing, a creature born of abandonment and injustice and years of swallowed grief. August 14th, 2004, 8:30 p.m. I was driving my mother home from her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nursing aide. We were on North Avenue, about half a mile from the intersection with Plattsburgh Avenue. The light was green. Green Victoria. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times in my mind, and the light was green. His voice cracked on the last word, and he paused, visibly gathering himself. The truck came out of nowhere, ran straight through the red light, doing at least 50. Hit us broadside on the passenger side where my mother was sitting. The impact spun us into a telephone pole. I remember the sound of the glass shattering the metal, screaming, my mother's voice cutting off mid-sentence. Victoria's hand had risen to cover her mouth. She had known about the accident, had been told a sanitized version by her father before she was bundled onto the plane to London. But she had never heard Marcus's account, had never understood what he had lived through while she was being escorted out of the country. I woke up in the hospital 3 hours later. Broken ribs, concussion, and this. He held up his left hand, the scar vivid under the garage lights. Severed tendons, crushed bone surgery that lasted 4 hours. The doctors told me I was lucky to keep the hand at all. Marcus. But my mother wasn't so lucky. Spinal cord injury, complete paralysis from the waist down. She hasn't walked in 20 years, Victoria. She wheels herself around the house I bought her with money I earned fixing cars with a hand that still aches when the weather changes. That's what happened. That's what I was dealing with while you vanished without a word. Danny had turned back to his workbench, giving them the privacy of turned shoulders, even if he could still hear every word. The truck driver. Victoria forced the words out through a throat that had gone tight. What happened to him? Marcus's laugh was bitter enough to curdle milk. William Garrett, employee of Harrington Industries Logistics Division. 2 weeks after the accident, all charges were dropped. Witness statements were revised. The police report was amended. Suddenly, I was the one who ran the red light. I was the one driving recklessly. I was the one responsible for putting my own mother in a wheelchair. The pieces were falling into place now, each one more terrible than the last. My father paid him off. Your father paid everyone off. The witnesses, the police, the insurance company, the scholarship committee at UVM who revoked my admission because they couldn't have a reckless driver representing their engineering program. Marcus's voice had gone quiet now, almost contemplative, which was somehow more devastating than the rage. Richard Harrington is very thorough. He didn't just want me away from you. He wanted me destroyed. And he very nearly succeeded. Victoria's legs would no longer hold her. She reached for the nearest solid surface, the Mustang's fender, and gripped it like a drowning woman holding onto driftwood. I didn't know. The words were barely a whisper. Marcus, I swear to you, I didn't know any of this. He told me you were fine, that the accident was minor, that you had already moved on with someone else. He said you didn't want to see me, that you had asked him to keep me away. And you believed him. It was not a question, and there was no good answer. She had believed her father because she was 27 years old and financially dependent and had spent her entire life being taught that Richard Harrington's word was law. She had believed him because the alternative that he would deliberately destroy an innocent man's life had seemed impossible. I was weak. Victoria met his eyes, refusing to look away, even as shame burned through her. I was young and I was scared, and I let him control me because I didn't know how to do anything else. I'm not making excuses. There are no excuses for what happened to you, but I need you to understand I thought about you every day. Every single day for 20 years. I looked for you, searched every database I could access, hired people to find Marcus Dawson. But you had disappeared. I changed my name. His voice was flat. Too many people in Burlington remembered Marcus Dawson, the kid who put his mother in a wheelchair. I couldn't get work, couldn't walk down the street without someone whispering. So I took my father's name and started over. Cole. Thomas Cole, the best man I ever knew. He died when I was 16, but everything I am, everything I've built, it's because of what he taught me. Marcus paused and something shifted in his expression, a brief glimpse of something other than anger. He used to say that any machine can be fixed if you have enough patience and the right tools. I tried to believe that applied to people too. Some days I still do. The garage fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional clink of tools from Danny's workbench. Victoria stood with her hands still braced against the Mustang, aware that she was at a crossroads that would determine everything that came after. I'm going to find the truth. Her voice was stronger now, steadied by a certainty that had been building since that moment in the parking lot 3 days ago. I'm going to hire the best investigators money can buy, and I'm going to dig up every piece of evidence my father buried. And when I have proof that you were innocent, proof that the accident was covered up, proof that everything you've been blamed for was a lie, I'm going to make it public. I'm going to clear your name. Marcus studied her with eyes that had learned not to trust anything they saw. Why, what difference does it make after 20 years? Because it's the truth. And because Victoria stopped, forcing herself to be honest, even though honesty felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. Because for 20 years I've been living with the guilt of believing I abandoned you. And now I find out that my father stole our letters, destroyed our chance to stay connected, framed you for an accident you didn't cause, and let you carry that burden alone. I can't undo what happened, but I can try to set the record straight. Before Marcus could respond, the sound of a vehicle pulling up outside the garage cut through the tension. A minivan, burgundy and practical, stopped in the loading zone. The side door slid open and a small figure emerged in a blur of honey blonde hair and overalls. The transformation in Marcus was instantaneous. The wall crumbled, the fortress dissolved, and what remained was something Victoria had never seen in him before: pure, uncomplicated love. The girl ran toward the garage, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her gap-toothed smile identical to the one in the photograph. She launched herself at Marcus's legs, wrapping her arms around him with the complete trust of a child who has never been let down. "Daddy, I missed you." Marcus swept her up in his arms, settling her against his hip with practiced ease. His face had completely changed, softer, warmer, younger somehow, as if the presence of this child had unlocked a door to a self he kept hidden from the rest of the world. "Missed you too, Lilybug. How was art class?" "I drew a bear." Lily held up a piece of construction paper, the image rendered in the confident crayon strokes of a 7-year-old artist. The bear was brown, standing on 2 legs, holding what appeared to be a flower. "I made it for you because you're my bear." Victoria's heart clenched. Bear. The nickname she had given him 20 years ago, now passed down to a daughter who had never known her. Lily noticed Victoria for the first time, turning to study her with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "Who are you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Marcus's expression had shifted again, a new wariness entering his eyes as he looked between his daughter and the woman from his past. "She's a customer." His voice was carefully neutral. "She was just leaving." "Oh." Lily considered this, then tilted her head in a gesture that was purely her own. "Why is she crying?" Victoria touched her cheek and was surprised to find it wet. She had not realized the tears had started, had not felt them tracking down her face while she watched the reunion between father and daughter. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they see something beautiful. Victoria managed a smile that felt fragile as spun glass. "Your drawing is very beautiful, Lily." The girl beamed at the compliment, holding the bear picture higher. Daddy says I'm the best artist in second grade, but I think Sophie is better because she can draw horses and I can't do horses yet. You'll learn. Marcus's voice had softened, but his eyes on Victoria remained guarded. Give yourself time. Daddy, can we have mac and cheese for dinner? The orange kind, not the white kind. We'll see. That means probably. Lily turned to Victoria with the conspiratorial air of someone sharing classified information. When Daddy says we'll see, it mostly means yes, but sometimes it means no if I didn't clean my room. Victoria laughed despite everything, despite the tears still wet on her face and the weight of 2 decades pressing on her shoulders. There was something healing about this child's unself-conscious chatter, her complete obliviousness to the history crackling between the adults around her. I should go. Victoria took a step toward the door, then stopped. The business card, I still have it, in case I need any work done on my car. Marcus's nod was barely perceptible. We're closed Sundays. I'll remember that. She walked toward the door, feeling his gaze on her back, feeling the weight of everything that had been said and left unsaid. At the threshold, she turned one final time. Lily had rested her head on Marcus's shoulder, still clutching her, bear drawing, looking at Victoria with the serene acceptance of a child who assumes all adults know what they're doing. Marcus stood solid and immovable, his daughter in his arms, a living example of everything he had built from the ruins of his former life. Sometimes grown-ups cry over things they've lost. Victoria's voice was quiet, meant for Marcus, even as she addressed his daughter's question. But crying isn't weakness. Real weakness is knowing something's wrong and not having the courage to fix it. She saw Marcus's eyes widen slightly, recognition flickering across his features. He had said something similar once 20 years ago, lying on a blanket in Battery Park while the stars wheeled overhead. She had remembered, had carried those words with her through 2 decades of success and emptiness and carefully buried grief. And then she was outside, the October air sharp against her wet cheeks, walking toward her rental car with legs that felt unsteady beneath her. Behind her, she heard Lily's voice, muffled by the garage walls but still audible. Daddy, why was the lady crying? She did not hear Marcus's response. Perhaps it was better that way. Victoria drove back to her hotel through streets that were simultaneously familiar and foreign, past landmarks that triggered memories she had spent years trying to suppress. Church Street Marketplace, where they had first met. Battery Park, where they had counted stars. The waterfront, where they had talked about futures that would never come to pass. Her phone rang as she pulled into the hotel parking garage. Catherine's name glowed on the screen. I have James Morrison on retainer. He can start immediately. But Victoria, I need you to understand something before we proceed. I'm listening. Morrison says that if your father covered up this accident, the way you're describing, there will be paper trails. Witnesses who were paid off. Police reports that were altered. Insurance documents that don't match hospital records. 20 years is a long time, but these things don't disappear completely. If we dig, we will find something. Good, that's what I want. And when we find it, there will be consequences. Your father's company, his reputation, your own relationship with him. Catherine paused. There may also be criminal liability, obstruction of justice, bribery, fraud. Richard Harrington could face charges that would follow him for the rest of his life. Victoria thought of Marcus's face in the garage, the rage and the grief and the 20 years of carrying a burden that had never been his to bear. She thought of Helen Cole wheeling herself around a house her son had bought with money earned through manual labor, never walking again because of an accident that had been covered up to protect a corporation's bottom line. Then let's make sure we find everything. Every document, every witness, every dollar that changed hands. I want to know exactly what my father did and how he did it. She ended the call and sat in her car, staring at the concrete walls of the parking garage, letting the silence settle around her. 20 years. She had lost 20 years to her father's manipulation, to her own weakness, to a lie that had been carefully constructed and ruthlessly maintained. She could not get those years back. She could not undo the damage that had been done to Marcus, to his mother, to the life they might have built together. But she could fight for the truth now. She could use the resources she had accumulated, the power she had built, the independence she had finally claimed, to expose what had really happened, on that August night in 2004. She could clear Marcus Cole's name. She could prove that he had been innocent all along, that the accident had been caused by a Harrington Industries truck running a red light, that the cover-up had been orchestrated by her own father to protect his company and separate his daughter from a man he considered beneath her. And maybe, just maybe, she could begin to repair some of the damage. Not all of it. Some things were broken beyond fixing. But she could try. She could do what she should have done 20 years ago, when she was young and scared and let her father's money and power dictate the course of her life. She could fight. Victoria stepped out of her car and walked toward the elevator, her heels echoing in the empty garage. Upstairs in her hotel room, she would begin making calls. Morrison, the investigator, old contacts at newspapers and law firms, people who owed her favors, people who could be trusted to be discreet. The investigation would take time, weeks probably, months if the trail had been thoroughly obscured, but she would follow it wherever it led, even if it led directly to her father's door, because some debts could not be measured in money, and some truths once uncovered could not be buried again. The elevator doors closed behind her, and Victoria Harrington began to plan. In his garage on Pine Street, Marcus Cole watched his daughter draw another picture, this one of a princess with yellow hair and a crown standing next to a brown bear, and tried to make sense of the last hour. Victoria Harrington had returned. Not just returned to Burlington, but returned to his life, bringing with her questions he had stopped asking years ago. The letter she claimed to have written. The cover-up she was now investigating. The 20 years of silence that she insisted had not been her choice. He wanted to dismiss it as manipulation. Rich people were good at manipulation, at rewriting history to paint themselves as victims rather than perpetrators. He had seen it before in the way Richard Harrington had twisted the accident narrative, in the way the entire legal system had bent to accommodate the needs of wealth and power. But something in Victoria's face had not looked like manipulation. The tears tracking down her cheeks when she saw Lily. The way her voice had cracked when she spoke about the letter. The genuine shock in her eyes when he described what had really happened after the accident. Either she was an extraordinary actress or she had not known. 20 years of believing he had abandoned her just as he had believed she had abandoned him. Two people destroyed by a lie so comprehensive that neither had ever questioned it. "Daddy," Lily's voice cut through his thoughts. "Is the crying lady coming back?" Marcus looked down at his daughter, at those blue-gray eyes that were his own, staring up at him with innocent curiosity. She was 7 years old, the same age he had been when his father first put a wrench in his hand and taught him the satisfaction of fixing something broken. "I don't know, Lilybug. I hope she does. She seems sad." Lily returned to her drawing, adding more details to the princess's dress. "Maybe she needs a friend." Out of the mouths of babes, Marcus thought. Maybe she needs a friend. Or maybe she needs the truth. Maybe they both did. He gathered Lily's backpack and art supplies, preparing to close the garage for the night. Danny had already left with a significant look and a muttered, "We'll talk tomorrow," that promised future conversations Marcus was not looking forward to. Tomorrow. Tomorrow he would decide whether to believe Victoria Harrington, whether to let her investigation proceed, whether to open doors that had been sealed shut for 2 decades. But tonight he would make mac and cheese for his daughter, the orangey, and help her with her homework and read her a bedtime story. Tonight he would be the father that Thomas Cole had taught him to be, steady and present and focused on what mattered. The past would still be there in the morning. It always was. Marcus locked the garage door, took Lily's hand, and walked toward the parking lot where his truck waited to carry them home. The Hilton's conference room had been transformed into a war room. Photographs spread across the mahogany table, documents stacked in careful piles, a whiteboard covered in James Morrison's precise handwriting, connecting names and dates and dollar amounts. Victoria stood at the window, coffee growing cold in her hands, watching the sunrise paint Lake Champlain in shades of gold and pink, while Morrison walked her through what he had discovered in 7 days of intensive investigation. Morrison was 63, silver-haired, with the methodical demeanor of a man who had spent 3 decades chasing truths that powerful people wanted buried. He had been skeptical at first. Cold cases from 20 years ago rarely yielded new evidence, but something in Victoria's voice had convinced him to take the job. Now, standing in the pale morning light with his preliminary findings spread before them, he understood why she had been so certain something would be found. The accident report filed with the Burlington PD on August 15, 2004, was amended 3 times in the subsequent 2 weeks. Morrison's voice was flat factual, the voice of someone presenting evidence to a jury. The original report, which I obtained from a retired officer who kept personal copies of his case files, clearly states that the Harrington Industries truck ran the red light at the intersection of North Avenue and Plattsburgh Avenue. Witness statements from 2 bystanders corroborate this. Victoria turned from the window, and the amended report reverses the narrative entirely, claims Marcus Dawson ran the light. The witness statements were either withdrawn or modified. The investigating officer was transferred to a desk position 2 months later with a significant increase in salary. Morrison tapped a document with one finger. Someone paid a lot of money to rewrite history. The truck driver, William Garrett, left Vermont in September 2004, relocated to Tucson, Arizona, where he purchased a home in cash and opened a small landscaping business. No mortgage, no loans. A man who had been making $32,000 a year as a delivery driver suddenly had enough capital to buy property and start a company. Victoria set her coffee cup down with more force than intended. Where is he now? Same address, still running the landscaping business. I've done preliminary reconnaissance. He's there, he's accessible, and based on his social media activity, he's not exactly living the high life. The money he received 20 years ago appears to have been a one-time payment. No ongoing support from Harrington Industries. Meaning my father bought his silence but didn't buy his loyalty. Meaning he might be persuaded to talk, especially if the alternative is potential criminal liability as an accessory to fraud and obstruction of justice. Victoria moved to the table studying the photographs Morrison had assembled. Richard Harrington at a charity gala in 2005 shaking hands with the Burlington police chief. Arthur Blackwell, her father's attorney, leaving the courthouse with a briefcase full of documents. William Garrett's employee photo from Harrington Industries, a tired-looking man in his 40s with the resigned expression of someone who had made peace with a dead-end job. What about the letter? Morrison hesitated, the first crack in his professional composure. That's more difficult to trace. Paper doesn't leave the same kind of trail as financial transactions. But I've located Martha Pemberton, the housekeeper you mentioned. She's retired now, living in Clearwater, Florida. I spoke with her by phone yesterday. And she remembered the letter. She remembered you giving it to her, asking her to deliver it to Pine Street. And she remembered what happened when she tried. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. 20 years of uncertainty, 20 years of not knowing whether the letter had been lost or ignored or simply never delivered. Now finally she was about to learn the truth. Your father intercepted her in the foyer, took the letter from her hands before she could leave the house, told her that if she ever mentioned the letter to anyone, you, Marcus Dawson, the police, she would lose her job, her pension, and any chance of future employment in Vermont. Morrison's voice softened slightly. She was 61 years old, supporting 2 grandchildren whose parents had abandoned them. She had no savings, no other prospects. She did what she felt she had to do to survive. He burned it. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. In the fireplace, while she watched. That's what she told me. He burned the letter, told her to forget it ever existed, and sent her back to her duties. She never spoke of it again until yesterday. Victoria sank into one of the conference room chairs, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. She had known on some level that her father was responsible, but hearing it confirmed was different. Hearing the specific details of his cruelty, the calculated destruction of a young woman's desperate attempt to reach the man she loved. I need to speak with her myself. I anticipated that. She's agreed to a video call this afternoon, and she's willing to provide a sworn affidavit if necessary. Morrison gathered his documents into a neat stack. Ms. Harrington, before we proceed further, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Go ahead. Are you prepared for what happens when this information becomes public? Because once we start pulling threads, the whole tapestry unravels. Your father's reputation, his company, your own position within the family structure. The relationships you've built over the past 20 years with people who benefited from his wealth and influence. Morrison met her eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had seen families torn apart by revelations far less damaging than this. There's no putting this genie back in the bottle. Victoria thought of Marcus in his garage, lifting his daughter into his arms, the wall he had built to protect himself from a world that had blamed him for something he didn't do. She thought of Helen Cole confined to a wheelchair for 2 decades because a truck driver ran a red light and a rich man decided his company's reputation was worth more than a woman's ability to walk. My father built his empire on lies and the suffering of innocent people. It's time someone told the truth, regardless of the cost. Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then let's get to work. The video call with Martha Pemberton lasted 2 hours. The former housekeeper was nervous at first, her voice trembling as she recounted events she had kept buried for 2 decades. But as the conversation progressed, something shifted, relief perhaps, at finally being able to tell someone what she had witnessed. She remembered Victoria as a young woman, passionate and headstrong, so clearly in love with the mechanic's son that it radiated from her like heat from a fire. She remembered Richard Harrington's cold fury when he discovered the relationship, the way he had systematically planned his daughter's removal from Burlington like a general planning a military campaign. The morning after the accident, he came to my room at 5 o'clock. Martha's voice carried the weight of long-held guilt. Told me to wake you, help you pack a bag, say nothing about what had happened. I didn't even know about the accident until later. I thought it was just about the boy, about getting you away from him. It wasn't until I saw the news reports that I understood how much worse it was. Victoria leaned closer to the screen, her heart pounding against her ribs. The letter, Martha. Tell me about the letter. You gave it to me that evening before you went to sleep. 3 pages sealed in an envelope, with his name on the front. You made me promise to deliver it first thing in the morning before your father could stop me. Martha's face crumpled with remembered shame. I tried, Miss Victoria. I put on my coat, had my keys in my hand, was 3 steps from the door when he appeared. What did he say? He didn't say anything at first, just held out his hand. I tried to refuse, told him you'd asked me to deliver it personally, but he just kept standing there with his hand out and his eyes. Martha shuddered. His eyes were like looking into a freezer. No warmth, no mercy, nothing human at all. I gave him the envelope. And then he walked to the fireplace in the study, lit a match, burned it without even reading what you'd written. When it was nothing but ash, he turned to me and said, Martha paused, gathering herself. He said that if I mentioned the letter to anyone, to you, or to the boy, or to a single living soul, he would make sure I spent my remaining years in poverty. He said he had friends in the nursing home industry, friends who could make my final years very uncomfortable if I didn't cooperate. Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the rage build in her chest like a living thing. Her father had threatened an elderly woman with destitution and neglect to cover up his manipulation. He had destroyed a young man's life, crippled his mother, stolen 20 years from 2 people who had done nothing wrong except fall in love. Martha, I need you to understand something. Victoria opened her eyes, letting the older woman see the steel beneath her composed exterior. What my father did to you, to Marcus, to me, none of it was your fault. You were a victim of his cruelty as much as any of us. And I'm going to make sure the world knows what really happened. Martha's eyes welled with tears. I've carried this for so long, Miss Victoria. Prayed about it every night, asked God to forgive me for my silence. Maybe now I can finally rest. You'll have that chance, I promise. The call ended and Victoria sat alone in the conference room, surrounded by evidence of her father's crimes. Morrison had left to pursue additional leads, bank records, corporate documents, anything that could corroborate the financial trail connecting Richard Harrington to the cover-up. But Victoria knew she could not wait for a complete investigation. She had to see Marcus again. She had to tell him what she had learned, to prove to him that her abandonment had not been voluntary, that she had fought to reach him even as her father was systematically erasing every bridge between them. The question was how. He had made it clear that he did not want her in his life, did not trust her. Explanations, did not believe that anything she said could change what had happened. She needed a way to approach him that he couldn't easily dismiss. And then she remembered. Al's French Fries, the little restaurant on Willard Street where they had eaten lunch a dozen times during that summer 20 years ago. The place where Marcus had first told her about his father, about his dreams of becoming an engineer, about his fear that he would never escape the gravitational pull of poverty that had defined his childhood. If anything could break through his defenses, it would be a reminder of what they had once shared. A gesture that proved she remembered that she had carried those memories with her, even when everything else had been taken away. Victoria gathered her things and headed for the door. The garage was busy when she arrived at BMW on the lift, a vintage Corvette in the second bay, Danny working beneath the hood of someone's pickup truck, while Marcus consulted with a customer near the office door. Victoria waited in her car until the customer left, watching Marcus move through his workspace with the comfortable authority of a man who had built something from nothing. He saw her approaching before she reached the door. His expression flickered something between irritation and resignation, but he did not turn away. Al's French fries. Victoria held up the paper bag. The logo faded but still recognizable. I drove past 3 times before I found it. Thought they might have closed, but apparently the grandson took over when Al retired. Marcus's jaw tightened. You think bringing lunch is going to fix this? No, I think it's going to get you to sit down and listen to me for 15 minutes without walking away. Something shifted in his eyes, not softening exactly, but perhaps a grudging acknowledgement that she was not giving up easily. He glanced at Danny, who had paused his work to watch the exchange with undisguised interest. Take a break, Marcus said. Back in 20... Danny nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. Sure thing, boss. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. They sat on the same folding chairs Victoria remembered from her previous visit, the paper bag open between them, the smell of fried food filling the garage. Marcus ate with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had learned to refuel rather than enjoy, but she noticed that he chose the same items. He had always ordered cheeseburger, extra pickles, no onions. My investigator confirmed everything. Victoria kept her voice steady, factual. The original police report clearly stated that the Harrington Industries truck ran the red light. Witness statements corroborated your version of events. But within 2 weeks, everything was amended. Witnesses recanted or changed their stories. The investigating officer was promoted to a desk job with a pay raise. And William Garrett, the driver who hit you, relocated to Arizona with enough cash to buy a house and start a business. Marcus set down his burger, his appetite apparently vanished. You have proof of all this. Documents, financial records, sworn testimony from people who were paid to lie. Victoria leaned forward, needing him to understand. Marcus, my father didn't just separate us. He destroyed your life to cover up his company's liability. He let you carry the blame for an accident you didn't cause, let your mother spend 20 years in a wheelchair while everyone in Burlington believed it was your fault. And I am going to make sure the world knows what really happened. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of traffic and the hum of the garage's industrial heaters. Marcus sat motionless, staring at the half-eaten food on the table, his expression unreadable. Why? The word was barely more than a breath. Because it's the truth. Because you deserve to have your name cleared. Because my mother died believing her husband was a good man, and I need to know if that belief was as false as everything else he told me. Marcus looked up sharply. Your mother, Eleanor, she died when you were 12. Heart disease according to the official records. But I've spent 20 years wondering if that was another lie. Victoria's voice cracked slightly, the first break in her composure since the conversation began. My father controls everything, Marcus. Every narrative, every truth, every piece of information that enters or leaves his sphere of influence. I don't know what's real anymore. I only know that I have to find out. Something changed in Marcus's posture, a subtle relaxation of the defensive tension he had carried since she first approached him. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of belief. My mother, he said slowly. Helen, she might know something. About the accident. About you. Marcus met her eyes, and for the first time since the parking lot, she saw something other than anger in his gaze. When you mentioned trying to contact me, she reacted. Just for a second, just a flicker. But I know my mother's face. She knows something she hasn't told me. Victoria's heart began to pound. You think she knew I tried to reach you? I think she's been carrying secrets as long as Martha has. And I think it's time she told them. The house on Pine Street was small but well-maintained, a craftsman-style bungalow with a wheelchair ramp leading to the front door and flower boxes beneath windows that still held the dried stalks of summer's blooms. Marcus had called ahead, warned his mother that they were coming, that there were questions that needed answers. Helen Cole met them at the door, her wheelchair navigating the narrow hallway with practiced ease. She was 73 but looked older, her face lined with the particular wariness of someone who had endured more than her share of suffering. But her eyes were sharp, intelligent, taking in Victoria with a mixture of recognition and something that looked almost like relief. "Victoria Harrington, I always wondered when you'd come back." Victoria froze in the doorway, caught off guard by the directness of the greeting. "You remember me?" "I remember the girl who made my son smile for the first time since his father died. I remember the summer he came alive again, talked about the future like it was something to look forward to instead of something to endure." Helen's voice was soft but steady. "And I remember the morning he woke up in the hospital asking where you were, why you hadn't come. I remember watching hope die in his eyes when I told him you were gone." Marcus moved past Victoria into the house, his jaw set with the tension of a man preparing himself for truths he might not want to hear. "Mom, we need to talk." "I know we do." Helen turned her chair and wheeled toward the living room. "I've been waiting 20 years for this conversation. Sit down, both of you. This is going to take a while." The living room was modest but comfortable, filled with photographs and handmade quilts, and the accumulated evidence of a life lived fully despite its limitations. Helen positioned her wheelchair near the window, where afternoon sunlight illuminated the silver of her hair and deepened the lines around her eyes. "6 months after the accident," she began without preamble, "a man came to see me, well-dressed, expensive suit, the kind of watch that costs more than my car. He said he represented someone who wished to remain anonymous, but I knew. You didn't have to be a genius to figure out whose money was behind a visit like that." Victoria and Marcus sat on the worn couch close enough that their shoulders almost touched, united in their attention to the elderly woman's words. "He offered me $200,000. All I had to do was sign a document promising never to pursue legal action against Harrington Industries for the accident, never to discuss the details with anyone, never to speak publicly about what had happened that night." Helen's voice hardened with remembered defiance. "I tore the check in half and told him to get out of my house." "Mom," Marcus's voice was strained, "you never told me." "I couldn't tell you, because a week later another man came. Different suit, same cold eyes. He said he was aware that I had declined the generous offer, and he wanted to make sure I understood the consequences of that decision." Helen paused, her hands tightening on the armrests of her wheelchair. The afternoon light caught the moisture gathering at the corners of her eyes. "He told me that you, Marcus, could still be charged with vehicular assault, that the amended police report would hold up in court, that your lack of formal education and your family's financial situation meant you couldn't afford the kind of defense that would be necessary to prove your innocence. He said you would go to prison, and I would spend my remaining years alone without my son, without anyone to help me." Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was her father's work, systematic, methodical, using fear and threats to ensure compliance from everyone who might challenge his narrative. And then he mentioned you. Helen turned to Victoria, her eyes filled with a pain that had been carried in silence for 2 decades. "He said you had been trying to contact Marcus. Letters, phone calls, even hired someone to try to find him. He said that if I helped facilitate any communication between you, if I told Marcus that you were looking for him, if I gave you any information about where he was or how to reach him, the threats against Marcus would be carried out immediately." The revelation hung in the air like smoke, filling the room with its bitter presence. Victoria's mind raced through the implications. Her father had not only destroyed the letter, had not only covered up the accident, but had actively threatened Marcus's mother to ensure that any future attempts at contact would be blocked. "You knew." Marcus's voice was hollow. "All this time you knew she was trying to reach me." "I knew." Helen's tears were falling freely now. "And I chose to protect you. I chose your freedom over your happiness, chose keeping you out of prison over letting you know that the woman you loved hadn't abandoned you after all. Every mother would die for her child. That's the easy sacrifice. But living with a secret that breaks your heart, watching your son grieve for something he thinks he lost, that pain never ends. That pain sits beside you at every meal, whispers to you in the darkness of every sleepless night. I chose that pain to keep you safe." Marcus stood abruptly, crossing to the window, his back to both women. Victoria could see his shoulders trembling, could imagine the war being fought behind his composed exterior, Rage and grief and confusion all battling for dominance. 20 years. His voice was rough. 20 years I believed she just walked away. 20 years I told myself that I had been a fool to trust her, that people like her didn't really fall in love with people like me. 20 years of he stopped, unable to continue. Victoria rose and moved toward him, stopping just short of touching him. Marcus, she did what she thought was right. She was trying to protect you. I know. The words came out broken. I know she was. And I would have done the same thing in her position. That's what makes it so damn hard. He turned suddenly, and Victoria found herself closer to him than she had been in 20 years. Close enough to see the gray flecks in his blue eyes, close enough to smell the motor oil and coffee that clung to his clothes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. I need time. His voice was steady now, controlled, but she could hear the cracks beneath the surface. I need to process all of this. The letter, the accident, what my mother did and why. You can't expect me to just... I don't expect anything. Victoria stepped back, giving him space. I'm not here to demand forgiveness or to pressure you into anything. I'm here because the truth matters and because you deserve to know it 20 years ago. Helen wheeled herself closer, reaching out to touch her son's hand. Marcus, look at me. He turned and Victoria saw the child he had once been lost, uncertain, desperately in need of something solid to hold on to. I'm sorry. Helen's voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry for every lie I told, every truth I hid, every day I watched you suffer and said nothing. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe all I did was trap you in a different kind of prison. Marcus knelt beside his mother's wheelchair, taking her hands in his. The gesture was so tender, unexpectedly gentle from a man who had built walls around himself for 2 decades that Victoria had to look away. You kept me out of jail, Mom. You kept food on the table and a roof over our heads. You did what you had to do to survive. He pressed his forehead against her hands. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at the man who put you in that position. Victoria watched the reunion between mother and son, feeling like an intruder in a moment too intimate for witnesses. But when Helen looked up and met her eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. Gratitude. Not for the investigation or the truth or any of the things Victoria had done in the past week. Gratitude for coming back, for forcing the conversation that Helen had been too afraid to initiate, for giving a mother the chance to finally confess to the son she had been lying to for 20 years. What happens now? Helen asked. Victoria straightened, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. Now I take what we know to my father. I give him a chance to come clean, to make restitution, to face the consequences of what he did. And if he refuses, he'll refuse. Marcus rose to his feet, his expression hardening into something dangerous. Men like Richard Harrington don't admit to anything. They double down, they counterattack, they destroy anyone who threatens to expose them. Then I'll be prepared for that. Are you? Marcus stepped closer and she could see the genuine concern beneath his skepticism. Because I've seen what he can do to people who challenge him. I've lived it. And you're his daughter. You're the one person in the world who might actually be able to hurt him. He won't let that happen without a fight. Victoria thought of the investigation Morrison was conducting, the evidence accumulating in the conference room at the Hilton, the web of lies and bribes and threats that was slowly being untangled. She thought of the years she had spent building her own company, her own fortune, her own power base entirely independent of her father's empire. I've spent 10 years preparing for this fight without even knowing it. I built Harrington Capital Partners from nothing, refused every offer of support from my father, created something that he couldn't touch or control. She met Marcus's eyes, letting him see the steel she had forged in the fire of her own ambition. I'm not the scared girl who got on that plane to London. I'm someone who knows how to survive. Marcus studied her for a long moment, searching for something in her face. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him. Then go, confront him, but be careful. His voice dropped, carrying a weight of hard-earned wisdom. And remember, people like him don't have friends. They have assets and liabilities. The moment you become a liability, he'll dispose of you the same way he tried to dispose of me. 2 weeks had passed since Victoria had hired James Morrison. 2 weeks of accumulated evidence, sworn statements, financial records, and documented lies. The stack of materials on her hotel room desk had grown to nearly 3 feet, a paper monument to her father's crimes. Morrison had found William Garrett in Arizona and convinced him to talk. The truck driver had been carrying guilt for 20 years, drinking heavily, struggling to maintain the business he had purchased with blood money. He had wept when Morrison explained what they were investigating, had agreed to provide a full statement in exchange for consideration in any future legal proceedings. Arthur Blackwell, her father's longtime attorney, had been harder to track. He was still practicing law in Burlington, still handling Harrington Industries' legal affairs, still presumably bound by attorney-client privilege. But Morrison had found evidence that Blackwell had personally overseen the amendment of the police report, had drafted the settlement agreements, with witnesses, had coordinated the cover-up with the precision of a military operation. When this went to court, and Victoria was increasingly certain it would go to court, Blackwell would face disbarment at minimum, criminal charges at maximum. The question was whether he would protect Richard Harrington or save himself. Victoria gathered the key documents into a folder, reviewing them one final time before the confrontation she had been preparing for since that October afternoon in the Shaw's parking lot. The original police report, Garrett's statement, Martha Pemberton's affidavit, bank records showing the payments that had purchased silence and complicity. Her phone rang, Morrison's number. "There's something else you should see before you confront your father." His voice was unusually tense. "Something I found in Blackwell's financial records that I don't think you were expecting." "Tell me." "The payments to Garrett, the witnesses, the police officers, those were all documented through a shell company Blackwell controlled. Standard procedure for buying silence without leaving obvious fingerprints. But there were other payments, Victoria. Regular disbursements starting in 1989, 15 years before the accident, continuing until 2000. Payments to whom? I don't know yet. The recipient used a numbered account in the Cayman Islands, but the amounts were substantial, $250,000 per year for 11 years. That's nearly $3 million total paid to someone or something that Blackwell was desperate to keep hidden." Victoria's mind raced through possibilities. Her father had been using Blackwell since the 80s, had trusted him with everything from corporate acquisitions to personal matters. What could possibly have required that much money paid over that many years, hidden behind layers of offshore secrecy? Keep digging, find out where that money went. "I intend to, but Victoria, the payments started in 1989 and stopped in 2000. Your mother died in 2000. Whatever this is, it overlaps precisely with the final years of her life. I don't know what that means yet, but I don't believe in coincidences." Victoria ended the call and stood motionless in her hotel room, staring at the city lights glittering beyond her window. Her mother, Eleanor Harrington, who had died of heart disease when Victoria was 12 years old, who had been gentle and kind and completely submissive to her husband's authority, who had spent her final years increasingly withdrawn, increasingly silent, increasingly absent even when she was physically present. What had her mother known? What secrets had she carried to her grave? The questions would have to wait. Victoria had a more immediate confrontation to handle. The Harrington Industries building arose 12 stories above Burlington's modest skyline, a monument to wealth and power that had shaped this city for 3 generations. Victoria had grown up in its shadow, had spent childhood afternoons in her father's corner office, had believed for most of her life that the empire represented achievement and success. Now she saw it for what it was, a throne built on the bones of everyone Richard Harrington had stepped on during his climb to the top. She took the elevator to the 12th floor where her father's executive suite occupied the entire eastern wing. His assistant, a severe woman named Patricia, who had been guarding Richard's door since Victoria was a teenager, looked up with undisguised surprise. "Miss Harrington, your father wasn't expecting you." "I imagine not. Is he in?" "He's in a meeting with the board of directors. I can schedule." "This won't wait." Victoria walked past the assistant's desk, ignoring the protests that followed, and pushed open the door to her father's private conference room. 7 men in expensive suits turned to stare at her. Richard Harrington sat at the head of the table, a presentation on the screen behind him, his expression shifting from annoyance to calculation in the space of a heartbeat. "Victoria, this is unexpected. I need to speak with you, alone. As you can see, I'm in the middle of—" "Now, Father, unless you'd like me to discuss family matters in front of your board." Something flickered in Richard's eyes, a recognition that this was not a social call, that his daughter had come for a reason, that the careful control he had maintained over her life might finally be slipping. He rose smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. "Gentlemen, if you'll excuse me, Patricia will bring refreshments while I handle this family matter." He led her to his private office, closing the door with the definitive click of a cell being sealed. The room was exactly as Victoria remembered: mahogany desk, leather chairs, walls lined with awards and photographs, documenting decades of business achievement, a shrine to success, a monument to lies. "What is this about?" Richard's voice was controlled, patient, the tone of a man accustomed to managing difficult situations. Victoria placed her folder on his desk, watching his face as he recognized the police department seal on the top document. "The accident in 2004. Marcus Dawson, you remember." "I remember a regrettable incident that was handled appropriately at the time." Appropriately. Victoria felt the rage building in her chest but kept her voice level. "You paid witnesses to change their statements. You bribed police officers to amend their reports. You threatened Marcus's mother into silence. You destroyed a letter I wrote trying to reach him. That's your definition of appropriate." Richard's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes, a recalculation, an assessment of how much she actually knew versus how much she was guessing. "I protected this family and this company from a liability situation that could have cost us millions in settlements and legal fees. I protected you from a relationship that would have destroyed your future. Everything I did was for your benefit." "For my benefit?" Victoria laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to draw blood. "You framed an innocent man for an accident your truck driver caused. You let his mother spend 20 years in a wheelchair while everyone believed it was his fault. You stole 20 years of my life because you decided a mechanic wasn't good enough for your daughter." "He wasn't." Richard's voice had hardened, now the patient facade cracking to reveal the steel beneath. "A boy with no education, no prospects, no family connections. What kind of life would you have had with him? A trailer in South Burlington. Children raised on minimum wage. You would have wasted everything I built for you on adolescent infatuation. You don't get to make that choice for me. You didn't get to destroy someone's life because you disapproved of who I loved. I got to do whatever was necessary to protect my family and my legacy." Richard stood, moving around the desk to stand directly in front of her. At 72, he was still an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, his eyes carrying the cold authority of a man who had never been successfully challenged. "And I would do it again tomorrow if I had to." Victoria held her ground, refusing to flinch. "Then you'll do it while facing criminal charges." "I have enough evidence to prove obstruction of justice, bribery, fraud, and conspiracy. I have witnesses willing to testify. I have documents you thought were buried, and I'm going to give all of it to the prosecutor's office." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, calculation, rage, before settling into something cold and flat. "You would destroy your own father. You destroyed an innocent man to protect your business interests. You destroyed my chance at happiness to protect your legacy. You destroyed—" Victoria's voice caught, and she forced herself to continue. "You destroyed my mother. I don't know how yet, but I know the payments to Blackwell started in 1989 and ended when she died. I know you well enough to understand that nothing in your life happens by coincidence." Richard's composure finally cracked. For just a moment, she saw something beneath the mask: fear, perhaps, or guilt, or simply the rage of a man who had been outmaneuvered. "Your mother died of heart disease. It's documented. The autopsy was performed by a respected medical examiner. The same medical examiner who received a substantial donation to the Children's Hospital Foundation the month after her death." Victoria watched her father's face go pale. "Morrison found that too. Whatever you're hiding about my mother, whatever those payments were covering up, I will find it. And when I do, nothing you've built will survive. If you pursue this," Richard's voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, "if you expose this family to public scrutiny, you will never inherit a single dollar of Harrington wealth. You will be cut off entirely, disowned, erased from every document, every trust, every provision I've ever made for your future." Victoria had anticipated this moment, Had prepared for it, in fact, during 2 weeks of sleepless nights and careful planning. She reached into her pocket and withdrew her checkbook, opening it to reveal the balance of her personal account. I built Harrington Capital Partners without your money, without your influence, without your name. I have $47 million in personal assets, Father. I have a company that generates $12 million in annual revenue. I have something you will never understand, the ability to survive without being propped up by inherited wealth and purchased silence. She tore the check she had prepared from the book and placed it on his desk. $1 made out to Richard Harrington with final payment for services rendered, written in the memo line. I was never your daughter. I was property you wanted to control, assets to be managed, liabilities to be contained. But property doesn't love. Property doesn't forgive. Property doesn't fight back. She met his eyes, letting him see the woman she had become, the woman his cruelty had forged. I do all three. Richard's face twisted into something ugly, all pretense of civility abandoned. If you walk out that door, you are no longer my daughter. You will never be welcome in my home, my business, my life. You will be dead to me. Victoria picked up her folder and walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with measured precision. At the threshold, she turned one final time. I've been dead to you for 47 years, Father. I just didn't realize it until now. The door closed behind her, and she walked through the executive suite with the controlled stride of a woman who had just burned her last bridge. Patricia watched her go with undisguised shock. The board members, visible through the conference room's glass walls, had stopped their conversation to stare. Victoria did not acknowledge any of them. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. The doors opened. She stepped inside, and as they closed behind her, she finally allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had just done. She had confronted the most powerful man she knew. She had accused him of crimes that could put him in prison. She had severed every financial and familial tie that connected her to the Harrington legacy. And she had done it for Marcus Cole, for Helen, for a letter burned 20 years ago in a fireplace, for the truth. The elevator descended, carrying her away from the life she had known and towards something entirely uncertain. Above her in his private office, Richard Harrington was already reaching for his phone. The counterattack came faster than Victoria had anticipated. Richard Harrington had not survived 5 decades of cutthroat business by hesitating when threatened. Monday morning, 3 days after their confrontation, Marcus received notification from the Vermont Department for Children and Families. An anonymous complaint had been filed regarding the welfare of a minor child in his custody. Allegations of unsafe living conditions, inappropriate supervision, potential neglect. A caseworker would be visiting within 48 hours to conduct an initial assessment. Monday afternoon, the IRS initiated a comprehensive audit of Cole's Auto Repair, requesting 7 years of financial records, tax returns, and documentation for every significant transaction. Monday evening, Burlington First National informed Marcus that his business loan was being called in early due to unspecified concerns about repayment capacity. He had 60 days to produce $140,000 or face foreclosure proceedings. By Tuesday morning, 3 of his largest commercial accounts, a trucking company, a delivery service, and a chain of convenience stores, had terminated their maintenance contracts, citing vague concerns about reliability and service quality. All 3 companies, Victoria would later discover, had financial ties to Harrington Industries through subsidiary investments and loan guarantees. Marcus stood in the middle of his garage, the termination letters spread across his workbench, his hands trembling with a rage he could barely contain. Danny had gone home early, unable to watch his friend absorb blow after blow without being able to help. Helen was with Lily at the house reading bedtime stories and pretending nothing was wrong. Victoria found him there at 9 o'clock, having received a frantic call from Danny explaining what had happened. She pushed through the garage door and saw him standing motionless among his tools, a man watching his carefully constructed life disintegrate around him. He's trying to take Lily. Marcus's voice was hollow, emptied of everything except exhaustion. The custody complaint, that's what this is really about. He knows I'll do anything to keep my daughter safe. Victoria moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the tension radiating from his body. The complaint is baseless. No judge would remove a child from a loving father based on anonymous accusations. You think that matters? Your father has money. Money buys lawyers. Lawyers drag out proceedings for months, years. Even if I win eventually, Lily spends that whole time wondering if she's going to be taken away from her home. Marcus finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes made her heart clench. He's not trying to win in court. He's trying to break me before we ever get there. Then we don't let him? How term? The word cracked like ice breaking. I'm about to lose my business, my home, maybe my daughter. I've been through this before, Victoria. I know what it feels like when powerful people decide to destroy you. Last time I had nothing to lose except my future. This time, he gestured at the garage around them, at the business he had spent nearly 2 decades building. This time I have everything to lose. Victoria reached into her bag and withdrew a folder, not the evidence she had compiled against her father, but something else. Bank statements, transfer authorizations, legal documents. $3.2 million. She laid the papers on his workbench. That's what I'm transferring into an escrow account controlled by Catherine Webb, my attorney. It will pay off your business loan, cover operating expenses during the audit, and fund whatever legal defense you need to fight the custody complaint. Marcus stared at the documents without touching them. I can't take your money. You're not taking it, you're borrowing it if it makes you feel better. Or consider it an investment in a business I believe in. Or call it what it actually is, reparations for what my family did to yours. Victoria, my father spent money to destroy your life. I'm spending money to rebuild it. That's not charity, that's justice. She met his eyes, refusing to look away. You can fight him, Marcus, but you can't fight him while you're worried about keeping the lights on. Let me give you that freedom. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of 2 decades of pain and the fragile possibility of something new. Marcus looked at the documents, at the garage around them, at the woman who had walked back into his life and upended everything he thought he knew. Lily doesn't know. His voice was quieter now, less hostile. About the complaint, about any of this. I sent her to school this morning, like everything was normal. She drew me a picture of a bear holding a briefcase because she thinks that's what businessmen do. Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. She sounds remarkable. She is. She's the best thing I've ever done, the only thing I've ever done that matters. And the thought of some caseworker coming into our house, looking at our lives, deciding whether I'm a fit parent. Marcus's voice broke. I can't lose her. I would burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone take her from me. Then let me help you fight. Not because I'm trying to buy your forgiveness, and not because I think money can fix what my father broke, but because Lily deserves a father who isn't spending every waking moment terrified of losing her. Victoria placed her hand on his arm, feeling the tension beneath the fabric of his shirt. Let me do this one thing, please. Marcus looked at her hand on his arm, at her face, at the documents waiting on his workbench. Something shifted in his expression. Not surrender, but perhaps acceptance. There's a caseworker coming tomorrow. Her name is Sandra Miller. She'll want to see the house, interview me, and Lily check that everything meets their standards. He exhaled slowly. I've been cleaning all night, scrubbing floors, organizing closets, making sure every piece of food in the refrigerator is fresh, as if that's what matters, as if they care about whether my grout is spotless. They care about whether Lily is safe and loved. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you will see that she is. You don't know that. You don't know what they look for, what they write in their reports, how they decide whether a single father is capable of raising a daughter. Marcus pulled away from her, touch pacing the length of the workbench. I've been doing this alone for 4 years. Since Sarah died, it's just been me and Lily against the world. And I thought I was doing okay. I thought I was managing. But now, you are doing okay. You're doing more than okay. Victoria stepped into his path, forcing him to stop. Marcus, I watched you with her for 30 seconds in this garage, and I saw a father who would move mountains for his daughter. That's what the caseworker will see too. And if she doesn't, if your father has gotten to her, somehow paid her off the way he paid off everyone else, then we appeal, we fight, we bring in our own experts, our own witnesses, our own evidence of what kind of father you are. Victoria's voice hardened with determination. I have spent the last 10 years learning how to win battles that powerful people try to rig against me. This is a battle I know how to fight. Marcus studied her face in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the garage, searching for something he seemed unable to name. Whatever he found made his shoulders drop slightly, releasing tension he had been carrying since the first letter arrived. Okay. The word was barely more than an exhale. Okay. We fight. The caseworker's visit went better than either of them had dared hope. Sandra Miller was a veteran of 20 years in child protective services, immune to both intimidation and bribery, and possessed of an experienced eye that could distinguish genuine problems from manufactured complaints. She spent 2 hours in the Cole household interviewing Marcus and Lily separately, inspecting the premises, reviewing medical records and school reports. When she left, she told Marcus that the complaint appeared to be unfounded and that she would be recommending closure of the case. Her final report would note that Lily Cole was a healthy, well-adjusted child living in a safe and loving home with a devoted father. The audit would take longer to resolve, but Catherine Webb's forensic accountants found no irregularities in Marcus's records. The IRS investigation, it seemed, was based on an anonymous tip that contained numerous false claims about unreported income and suspicious transactions. By the end of the second week, the revenue agents had shifted from aggressive investigation to apologetic withdrawal. The business loan was paid off with Victoria's funds transferred through a series of legitimate investment vehicles that insulated Marcus from any appearance of impropriety. The lost contracts were harder to replace, but Danny's network of connections in the local automotive community began generating new referrals almost immediately. Word had spread about what Richard Harrington was doing to the mechanic who had dared to challenge him, and Burlington's working-class community responded with the solidarity of people who understood what it meant to be crushed by wealth and power. By the third week, Cole's Auto Repair was operating at near normal capacity. The immediate crisis had been weathered. But Marcus knew, as Victoria knew, as everyone involved understood, that this was merely the opening skirmish in a much larger war. Richard Harrington had fired his first salvo. Now it was time to fire back. Morrison's investigation had continued throughout the crisis, his team working 18-hour days to compile the evidence needed for legal action. The documents were ready. The witnesses were prepared. The case against Richard Harrington was airtight, but Victoria wanted one more piece of the puzzle before she went to the prosecutor's office. She wanted William Garrett. The flight to Tucson took 4 hours. Victoria traveled alone, having decided that this conversation needed to happen without lawyers or investigators present. Garrett had agreed to talk, but Morrison warned that the former truck driver was fragile. Decades of guilt had taken their toll, and any pressure might cause him to withdraw his cooperation. She found him in the small office behind his landscaping company, a 68-year-old man with the weathered face and calloused hands of someone who had spent a lifetime doing physical work. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the recognition in his eyes, not of her specifically, but of what she represented. "You're Harrington's daughter." His voice was raspy, damaged by years of cigarettes and desert air. "The investigator told me you might come. I needed to hear it from you directly. What happened that night?" Garrett gestured to a worn chair across from his desk. His office was cluttered with invoices and equipment catalogs, the organized chaos of a small business owner. On the wall behind him hung a single photograph, a young woman in a graduation cap and gown, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed the future held nothing but promise. "My daughter," he said, noticing Victoria's gaze. "She was 12 when the accident happened. Now she's a pediatrician in Phoenix, married 2 kids of her own." He paused, something dark passing across his features. "She doesn't know. I never told her where the money came from. The money that paid for her education, her medical school, her chance at a life I could never have given her on a truck driver's salary." Victoria sat in the offered chair, keeping her expression neutral and despite the turmoil inside her. "Tell me what happened." Garrett closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked like a man preparing to step off a cliff. "August 14th, 2004. I was running a delivery route for Harrington Industries Logistics. That was the trucking division back then. Regular gig, decent money, union benefits. I'd been doing it for 11 years. The night of the accident, the schedule was impossible. 14 stops in 12 hours covering most of northern Vermont. The dispatchers didn't care about traffic or weather or basic physics. They just wanted the deliveries made. And if you complained, if you pushed back, there were 50 other guys waiting to take your job." His hands had begun to tremble. Victoria noticed but said nothing. "By 8 o'clock that night, I was running on coffee and desperation. Still had 3 stops to make before I could go home. The truck," He laughed bitterly. The truck was a goddamn death trap. Brake pads worn down to nothing, steering loose headlights flickering. I'd written up maintenance requests for months. Nobody cared. The intersection at North Avenue in Plattsburgh. The light was red. I knew it was red. I saw it change from yellow as I approached. Garrett's voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. But my brakes, I hit the pedal and nothing happened. Not nothing, but not enough. Not nearly enough. I was doing 50 and the light was red and there was nothing I could do except watch it happen. He stopped, his face contorted with the memory of that moment. Victoria waited, giving him the space to continue. The sound, I still hear it sometimes when I'm falling asleep or when the wind catches a piece of loose metal just right. That sound of the truck hitting their car, the glass, the screaming. He opened his eyes and they were wet with tears he had been carrying for 20 years. The woman in the passenger seat, she was looking right at me when we hit. Right at me. I saw her face through the windshield in that last second before impact. She knew. She knew what was about to happen, and there was nothing either of us could do to stop it. Victoria felt her own eyes burning but forced herself to remain composed. What happened after? I called it in, stayed with them until the ambulance arrived. The young man, Marcus, he was unconscious, bleeding from his head, his hand trapped in the wreckage. The woman was screaming. I've never heard a sound like that before or since. Animal sounds, pain so deep it bypasses everything human and becomes something primal. Garrett reached for a glass of water on his desk, his hand shaking badly enough to spill some on the papers beneath. The police came. I told them the truth, my brakes failed. I ran the red light. It was my fault. They took my statement, tested my blood alcohol, started processing the scene. He set the glass down. And then everything changed. My father's people, two of them in suits that cost more than my monthly salary, they found me at the hospital where I was being checked out, told me there had been a mistake with my statement, told me that their investigators had determined the other vehicle had run the red light, not me, told me I must have been confused from the shock of the accident. And you went along with it. Garrett's face crumpled. They offered me $200,000. Tax-free, deposited in a Cayman Islands account impossible to trace. All I had to do was sign an amended statement and agree to relocate out of state. Leave Vermont, never discuss the accident with anyone, let their version of events become the official record. You had a daughter to think about. I had a daughter who dreamed of being a doctor since she was 6 years old. A daughter whose future depended on money I would never earn hauling freight across New England. A daughter who looked at me like I was a hero because I worked 16-hour days to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. Garrett's voice broke completely. What was I supposed to do? Tell the truth and watch her dreams die, go to prison for vehicular assault while she grew up in foster care? Victoria reached across the desk and placed her hand over his trembling fingers. I understand. No, you don't. His eyes met hers, fierce with self-loathing. You can't understand what it's like to trade your soul for your child's future. To know that every success she achieves, every patient she heals, every life she saves, all of it is built on a lie I told 20 years ago. Built on the suffering of an innocent man and his mother. You can make it right now. Can I? Garrett laughed, but there was no humor in it. The woman is still in a wheelchair. Marcus Cole spent 20 years being blamed for something I did. His scholarship was revoked. His reputation destroyed, his entire life derailed. You think testifying in court fixes any of that? It doesn't fix it. Nothing can fix it. Victoria's voice was gentle but firm. But it can tell the truth. It can clear his name. It can show the world that Richard Harrington is not the pillar of the community everyone believes him to be. It can give Marcus back something your silence helped steal from him, his dignity. Garrett sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the photograph of his daughter on the wall. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady for the first time since the conversation began. I've been waiting for this day. Part of me, anyway. The part that still remembers what it felt like to be a man who told the truth, even when it was hard. He met Victoria's eyes. I'll testify. I'll tell the court everything. The breaks, the cover-up, the money, all of it. Whatever happens to me after that, I'll accept it. I've been running from this for 20 years. It's time to stop. Victoria felt something release in her chest tension she had been carrying since the moment she recognized Marcus in that parking lot. Thank you, William. I know this isn't easy. Easy, Garrett shook his head. This is the easiest decision I've made in 2 decades. Every other choice I made was about protecting myself, my daughter, my future. This one, he gestured at the air around him, encompassing everything he had built on his foundation of lies. This one is just about telling the truth. After everything else, the truth is almost a relief. She flew back to Vermont that night, Garrett's signed statement secured in her briefcase, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Morrison was waiting at the airport with news of his own. Arthur Blackwell had requested a meeting. The attorney was frightened. Victoria could see it in the way he held himself when she walked into his office the following morning, in the tremor of his hands as he poured himself a glass of water, in the darting glances toward the door as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. Miss Harrington, thank you for agreeing to see me. You asked for this meeting, Mr. Blackwell. I assume you have something to tell me. Blackwell sat behind his desk, surrounded by law books and diplomas that suddenly seemed like props in a play he no longer believed in. I've been Richard Harrington's attorney for 35 years. I've handled everything, his corporate acquisitions, his personal matters, his special problems. The accident cover-up. Among other things, Blackwell's voice was barely above a whisper. I know what you're building, Ms. Harrington. I know you have Garrett's statement, the original police reports, the financial records. I know you're planning to take this to the prosecutor's office. And you're here to talk me out of it. I'm here to give you everything. Blackwell reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a thick folder, sliding it across to Victoria. Every document I have, every communication with your father regarding the cover-up, every payment I authorized, every witness I contacted, every lie I helped construct. It's all there. Victoria stared at the folder without touching it. Why? Because I'm 71 years old and I'm tired of carrying this weight. Because your father called me yesterday and told me to destroy everything to prepare for a legal battle that could last years, to be ready to testify that I acted alone without his knowledge or authorization. Blackwell's laugh was hollow. After 35 years of loyal service, he's planning to throw me under the bus to save himself. So this is revenge. This is survival. If I go down, I'm not going down alone. And maybe, he paused, something almost human flickering in his tired eyes. Maybe there's a small part of me that's still capable of doing the right thing, even if it's 3 decades too late. Victoria opened the folder and began scanning the documents inside. What she found exceeded even her worst expectations. Not just the accident cover-up, but a pattern of systematic corruption stretching back to the 1980s. Bribery, fraud, tax evasion, environmental violations that had been concealed through payoffs to inspectors. And something else, something that made her blood run cold. The payments to the offshore account, the ones that stopped in 2000. Blackwell's face went pale. You found those. Morrison found the withdrawals, but he couldn't determine the destination. Victoria looked up from the documents. Tell me. The attorney was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Your mother, Miss Harrington. Those payments were connected to your mother. Victoria felt the room tilt around her. Explain. Eleanor Harrington discovered something in 1989. I don't know the specifics, your father never told me, but whatever it was, she threatened to go public, to expose him, to take you and leave. Blackwell swallowed hard. The payments were to ensure her silence. And when that wasn't enough, what? She died, Ms. Harrington, 2000. Heart disease, according to the official records. But I've always wondered. He stopped, apparently unable to continue. Victoria's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the documents. Her mother. Gentle, sad Eleanor, who had faded away during Victoria's childhood, who had seemed to shrink smaller with each passing year, until she simply wasn't there anymore. Are you telling me my father killed my mother? I'm telling you I don't know. I'm telling you the payments stopped immediately after her death. I'm telling you that Richard Harrington is capable of things most people can't imagine. Blackwell met her eyes and she saw genuine fear in his gaze. And I'm telling you to be careful. Because if he did what I think he did, there's nothing he won't do to protect himself. The courtroom in Burlington's federal building was smaller than television had led Victoria to expect: wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting, rows of hard benches that had absorbed decades of human drama. She sat in the gallery behind the prosecutor's table, watching her father take his seat at the defense table with a kind of rigid posture that betrayed nothing of what was happening inside him. Richard Harrington had been arrested 6 weeks after Victoria brought her evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office. The charges were extensive: obstruction of justice, bribery, fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen lesser offenses that would add years to any eventual sentence. He had been denied bail after the prosecutor argued convincingly that a man of his resources posed an extreme flight risk. The trial had lasted 3 weeks. Garrett testified, his voice steady despite the trembling of his hands, walking the jury through every detail of that August night and the cover-up that followed. Blackwell testified, producing documents that corroborated every accusation and revealed new ones the prosecution hadn't even known to look for. The police officer who had been paid to amend his report testified, having been granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation. Martha Pemberton testified by video link from Florida, her voice breaking as she described the letter that had been burned in the fireplace. And Marcus testified. He sat in the witness box for 4 hours answering questions about the accident, about his injuries, about his mother's paralysis, about the years of shame and blame he had carried while believing he was responsible for destroying his family's life. His voice never wavered. His eyes never left the jury. He told the truth simply and completely and let them decide what to do with it. Now they were waiting for the verdict. The jury had been deliberating for 2 days, and every hour that passed wound the tension in the courtroom tighter. Victoria felt Marcus's presence beside her. He had insisted on being there for the final chapter, despite Danny's protest that he should stay home with Lily. Helen was watching their granddaughter, had been since the trial began, understanding that her son needed to see this through to the end. Whatever happens in there, Marcus's voice was low, meant only for her ears. Whatever they decide, I want you to know that this was enough. You came back. You told the truth. You fought for something nobody else would have fought for. That matters. That matters more than any verdict. Victoria reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his, feeling the calluses and scars that mapped the life he had built from nothing. He's going to be convicted. The evidence is overwhelming. Maybe, or maybe he bought a juror. Maybe his lawyers found some technicality. Maybe. The courtroom doors opened and the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a decision. Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs as everyone rose as the judge took his seat, as the foreman stood with the verdict form in his hands. Guilty on all counts. The words seemed to come from very far away, filtered through a fog of disbelief and relief and something that felt almost like grief. Victoria watched her father's face as the verdicts were read: obstruction of justice guilty, bribery guilty, fraud guilty, conspiracy guilty. His expression never changed. He stood motionless at the defense table, his attorney's hand on his arm, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. 25 years. That was the sentence the judge imposed, reading from a prepared statement that cataloged Richard Harrington's crimes in clinical detail. 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole until he had served at least 20. At 72 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. Richard turned as the marshals approached to take him into custody. His eyes found Victoria in the gallery, and for one long moment, father and daughter stared at each other across the courtroom. She searched his face for something: regret, perhaps, or understanding, or even rage. Instead, she found only emptiness. The man who had controlled her entire life, who had destroyed Marcus and Helen and countless others in his pursuit of wealth and power, had finally been reduced to nothing. He turned away without speaking, and the marshals led him through a door at the side of the courtroom. Victoria watched until the door closed behind him. Marcus squeezed her hand. It's over. But Victoria knew it wasn't over, not entirely, because even as one chapter closed, another was beginning, a chapter that had nothing to do with courtrooms or evidence or the machinations of powerful men. Outside the courthouse, the autumn sun was setting over Burlington, painting the sky in the same shades of red and gold that had colored that October afternoon when her car broke down in a parking lot and a mechanic with a scarred hand changed everything. 6 months had passed since the verdict. The leaves on the maple trees had completed their cycle green to gold to red to bare branches, reaching toward a gray November sky, the rhythm of nature indifferent to human drama continuing its eternal pattern, regardless of what had happened in the courtroom or what would happen next. Cole's Auto Repair had expanded with Danny running a second location on the other side of town. Victoria had sold Harrington Capital Partners and used the proceeds to establish a foundation supporting families affected by corporate negligence, a way of turning her father's dirty money into something clean. Helen still used her wheelchair, but there was a lightness to her now that had been absent for 2 decades. The weight of secrets no longer pressed down on her shoulders. And Lily, now 8 years old, having celebrated her birthday during the chaos of the trial, had taken to following Victoria around with the devoted attention of a duckling who had imprinted on an unexpected mother. Marcus stood at the window of Helen's living room, watching the autumn sunset over Burlington. In his pocket was a small velvet box that had been there for 3 weeks waiting for the right moment. The doorbell rang. Lily abandoned her homework and raced to answer it, her excited voice carrying through the house. Victoria's here." Marcus turned and watched as Victoria entered, Lily immediately attaching herself to her leg. Victoria laughed and bent down to hug the girl properly, her eyes meeting Marcus's over Lily's honey blonde head. "Lily, why don't you go help Grandma set the table?" Marcus's voice was steadier than he felt. The girl looked between them with the shrewd assessment of a child who understood that adults sometimes needed privacy. "Okay, but save me a seat next to Victoria." She ran off toward the kitchen, and Victoria rose to her feet, her eyes questioning. "Marcus, is everything okay?" "Everything is better than okay." He crossed the room to stand before her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. His hand found the velvet box in his pocket. 20 years ago, I had a plan. I was going to finish my engineering degree, get a job at one of the tech companies in Burlington, save enough money to buy a house. And then I was going to ask you to marry me. Victoria's breath caught. "Marcus, your father took that future away from me. He took the scholarship, the career, the man I might have become. He took you." Marcus pulled the box from his pocket. "I spent 20 years believing that I would never get any of it back, that the best I could hope for was survival." He opened the box. The diamond caught the last light of the setting sun. "But then you came back. You told me the truth. You fought my battles when I didn't have the strength to fight them myself. You gave me back my name, my reputation, the 20 years of believing I was responsible for my mother's suffering." His voice cracked and he let it. "You gave me back hope, Victoria, and I'm not willing to lose that again." She was crying now, tears tracking down her cheeks. "My father used to say that any machine can be fixed with enough patience and the right tools. But people are harder. People require trust and forgiveness and the willingness to believe that broken things can become whole again." He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. "I trust you, Victoria. I forgive you for things that were never your fault. And I truly believe that we can build something whole from the pieces your father tried to destroy." Victoria looked at the ring on her finger, at the man standing before her. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then properly for the first time in 20 years. From the kitchen doorway, Lily's voice rang out. "Are they kissing, Grandma? They're kissing? Does this mean Victoria's going to be my mom?" Helen's laughter mixed with Victoria's, and Marcus found himself smiling for what felt like the first time in decades. The wedding was held the following autumn in the backyard of Helen's house on Pine Street. The maple trees wore their brightest colors against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Lily served as flower girl, scattering petals with excessive enthusiasm. Danny stood as best man, his eyes suspiciously bright throughout the ceremony. Catherine Webb flew in from New York to stand beside Victoria. The guest list was small friends from the garage, neighbors from Pine Street, people who had proven their loyalty during the crisis. No Harringtons were present. When the justice pronounced them husband and wife, Lily cheered loudly enough to startle birds from the nearby trees. Marcus kissed his bride under the autumn canopy, tasting the future on her lips. That night, they sat on the porch swing of the house on Pine Street, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Victoria leaned against his shoulder, her wedding dress rustling softly in the cool autumn breeze. 20 autumns. Her voice was soft. "We lost 20 autumns." Marcus wrapped his arm around her. "But we have the rest of our lives, decades of autumns, if we're lucky." "Do you think we can make up for lost time?" No, those years are gone, but we can build something new, something that proves everyone wrong whoever said that broken things can't be fixed. Victoria tilted her head to look at him. What tool did your father say you needed? Patience and the right tools. Marcus smiled. He was partly right, but the most important tool isn't something you can buy at a hardware store. He kissed her forehead. It's each other. That's what your father never understood. All his money, all his power, none of it could destroy what we had. It just buried it for a while. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone. Building your own empire, proving you could succeed alone. That's how my father raised me. And now I understand that real strength is letting someone in, trusting another person with your wounds, your fears, your hopes. She found his hand in the darkness. Real strength is believing someone when they say they love you. Marcus squeezed her hand, feeling the unfamiliar weight of her wedding ring against his fingers. I do love you. I never stopped even when I thought I hated you. The love was always there, buried under the anger. You were always good enough, Marcus. You were the only real thing in my life. You didn't lose me. Your father took me. But we're both here now, together, alive and free. He turned to face her fully. That's what matters. That's the only thing that matters. She kissed him softly. The porch swing creaked beneath their shifting weight. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal witnesses to moments that would never come again. When they finally broke apart, Marcus pointed toward the eastern horizon where the first faint glow of dawn was beginning to appear. Look, new day. Victoria leaned against him. New life. New everything. And this time nobody takes it away from us. The sun rose over Burlington, painting the autumn leaves in shades of gold and fire. In the garage on Pine Street, the Mustang waited for Monday's work. In Helen's house, photographs of the wedding were already being arranged on shelves. In Danny's apartment, Lily, now 9 years old, was probably just waking up, ready to begin her new life with a mother she had chosen and a father who had never stopped fighting for her. And on the porch swing of a small house on Pine Street, Marcus and Victoria Cole watched the dawn break over Vermont, their hands intertwined, their futures finally beginning. 20 years of darkness, 20 years of lies and manipulation, all of it washed away by the morning light, all of it replaced by something built from patience and trust and the stubborn refusal to give up on love, something that would last.